I'll be completely honest with you. I never knew much about the deep web or the things that go on there. As a parent, all I had to know was that it was bad and that I had to keep my kids away from that place. When the day one of them got curious about the deep web and went too deep, I tried to get him off as quickly as possible. What I didn't know was that the deep web wasn't the worst of our problems. Something else was stalking us, and ignoring it was the worst mistake my wife and I could have made. It all started when our oldest son, Fred, became overly interested in technology. He told us his dream was to work in the IT security field. We were very happy for him. He had just turned 18 a few months ago and had never shown such passion for anything. Maybe his future was in the technology field. And that excited us, as it's a very promising future with a lot of job opportunities. Fred couldn't get a job, so we decided to buy him a computer and give him everything we could so he could get an education without having to work. My wife didn't think this was a good idea, but I managed to convince her that we had to support him. So, Fred's journey to study computer security began. What we didn't know was that this would be the beginning of the end. At the beginning, we saw Fred very excited, telling us everything he was learning. But after a few weeks, something strange started to happen. Fred was distant. He was never one to have any problems or teenage crises, but suddenly he was barely speaking to us. He didn't fight with us or anything like that. He even treated us as well as he always did. But he didn't eat with us anymore. He was so immersed in the computer that he didn't even see the sunlight. He didn't sleep, and we didn't even know when he was sleeping and when he was awake. And the worst part was that this was just the beginning. It was a winter night. I was usually a very heavy sleeper, so my wife woke me up. She told me she heard a loud bang coming from outside. Worried, I went outside to see what was going on. I grabbed an old field hockey stick and stood ready for anything. The kitchen door was closed, just as I had left it. But still, something was wrong. The floor was dirty. I'm sure those marks weren't there before we went to sleep. I carefully held the hockey stick as I opened the door. I was overcome with an enormous terror that I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like I was going to have to fight someone, like there was someone behind the door. Once I finished unlocking it, I opened it as fast as I could. When I went out into the yard with my hockey stick, I went out ready to hit someone. But when I looked outside, there was no one there. I was about to go back into the house when I was startled by a shadow in the distance. I looked out and that's when I saw it. It was a person coming out of my yard and entering the neighbor's house. It was neither my imagination nor my wife's. That man was in the house. The next few days were even worse. No matter how many times we called the police, there were always people hanging around the house. Open windows, broken things in the yard, strange power outages, and strange people walking in from outside and looking at the house. We were clearly being targeted. But why did they make themselves look this way? Why didn't they ever steal anything? The whole family was scared. So far, nothing had happened. But we knew that sooner or later they would go further. We could do nothing to prevent it. I bought a gun to protect my family, but even that could end very badly. And one night, it did. But not in the way I expected. While all this was happening, Fred was more distant than ever. I don't know why, but he didn't seem surprised by anything that happened. I know it was far-fetched, but I just had a feeling he had something to do with it. One day, when he was in the bathroom, I went into his room. What I saw left me confused. He was on a social network similar to Facebook, only it had a different name, The Dark Lair. I thought about asking my son what it was, but he would probably get mad that I was in his room. I think not talking to him was the biggest mistake I made, and that same night, I would pay for it. That night, my wife was at her parents' house with our youngest daughter. Meanwhile, Fred, his brother, and I stayed behind, as I had to go to work. Our other son had to go to school, and Fred didn't want to go. Once dawn came, Fred started screaming desperately that someone had broken into the house. I told his brother to hide in his room and ran to Fred. He was crying, clearly upset, shaking with terror. "Fred, what happened? Where did they come in?" It was two men. They came in the back. I came out of my room to get some water and I saw them. They were there. Calm down. What did they do? Where are they now? They went to the garage. They're probably trying to steal your car. God damn it. Desperate, I grabbed my gun and went to the garage. They could have easily escaped with my car. But what really worried me was that they were looking for something else. They were hanging around the house a lot. That day it was my car, but another day it could be my family. I opened the garage door and to my surprise, there was no one there. They were probably hiding. I had to be careful. Out of nowhere, someone attacked me. My weapon fell to the ground after the first hit, and my attacker took advantage of the situation to hit me again and again. This person didn't come in to rob me. He just wanted to kill me. I turned around trying to see his face, thinking at any moment that Fred would get into the fight. When I turned around, I couldn't believe what was happening. The man who attacked me was Fred. Without saying anything, Fred hit me again and again, trying to hit my head and kill me. I was able to cover myself enough and jump to attack him, but before I could, he hit me hard in the legs and I fell. Once on the ground, he kept hitting me again and again. Suddenly, I heard a scream from far away coming towards Fred. It was my youngest son. When he was close to us, he stood still for a moment, looking at Fred with a look of disbelief on his face. Fred grabbed my gun and slowly approached his brother with a sinister smile. He was going to kill him. I tried to get up, but quickly fell to the floor. My youngest son ran to the back door and escaped. Fred was right behind him. As soon as Fred tried to get out, something scared him to death. Fred pointed his gun at something I couldn't see, and in a matter of seconds, the gun was pulled out. Fred came running in my direction, terrified, and that's when I saw them. The gun was pulled out. 3 men in hoodies rushed in and grabbed my son before he could escape. The men threw him to the ground, and one of them pulled out a gun. All I could see was Fred, my oldest son, the boy I would have given anything for. He was crying. He was 18 years old. I didn't know why he attacked me, but he was still just a boy. Dad, help me! Dad, help me, please! Fred, no! Suddenly, a shot rang out in the house. I closed my eyes before I saw the shot, but I knew what had happened. I looked up, hoping I was wrong, but I saw what no parent ever wants to see. My son was no longer crying, no longer screaming. His body lay lifeless in a pool of blood. Without giving me time to process the image, the 3 men walked towards me. Cowards! How could you do this to a child? This child was going to kill you and his brother. When your wife came back with your daughter, he was going to kill them too. After that, he was going to go to your youngest son's school and do a shooting. What? That's not possible! Your son wanted to be famous. His computer is on. Look at all his postings on Dark Lair. The deep web is really big, and that kid was really dumb, posting stuff like that on one of the only white flag hacker sites. We tried to warn him. We gave him lots of chances, lots of visits, lots of messages. Educate your other son better, will you? And for God's sake, check what your kids are up to. The internet is very dangerous. How dare you come here and attack my son? I'm calling the police. You're all going to prison. Yeah, you're welcome. And without another word to me, the men left. A few seconds later, my youngest son came running to me. He told me a 4th man had caught him in the yard and was holding him. I immediately called the police and ended up in an ambulance within minutes. While waiting, I thought about going over to Fred's computer, but I chose not to. All I did was stay and cry with my son over the death of his brother. It's been a few years since that night. I still haven't gotten over what happened to Fred, but his brother took a better path. I never understood what happened to Fred. Had the deep web corrupted him, or did he always have these ambitions and tried to go to the deep web to feed them? All I know is that if he had a problem, we could have helped him. He could have been healed. He could have been better. But those men who were never caught just killed him as if they were eliminating a small plague. I don't know if what happened was justice, if many deaths were prevented, or if it was simply one murder for another. The only thing I know is that I lost my son, and I will never get him back. Although we cannot mention the real names of the victim, the story is based on a real crime that occurred on the deep web. The deep web is normally a place for the most dangerous and perverse people in the world. But a social network called the Dark Lair is full of white flag hackers. who prevent these crimes from happening and try to protect the internet from the most dangerous people, but with their own methods.
Have you ever heard the saying, "You can never know someone well enough"? That's a phrase we hear said a lot, but how many of us actually think about it? I, for one, didn't. And that might have been the worst and the last mistake of my life. How many of you know Armin Muse? In case you don't know him, I'll tell you a little about him. Armin Muse is a psychopath who surfed the deep web. On this page, he entered a forum where he was looking to meet people. Once he met the ideal person, they arranged a day to meet. Do you know what the only detail of this is? The reason for the meeting was not love. They arranged to meet so that Muse would eat them alive. And this person not only accepted, but was thrilled with the idea. Do you want to know another fact about Armin? He was my neighbor all of my life. I'll be honest, he never acted like a psychopath, nor did he show me any strange side. He'd always been kind and helpful, the kind of person you could trust without hesitation. I admit he had a strange relationship with his mother. He was always very dependent on her, and we never saw him pull away until she died in 1999. But other than that, there was nothing strange about him. He would often help my mother with small repairs around the house that I didn't even know how to do, and she would bring him cakes that she baked, while he would tell me about his work and how technology was advancing. We always had a good relationship. I never thought of him as a bad person, let alone a cannibal. When I mentioned that I was looking for a new computer, he was the first to offer me one. I remember that I had told my mother that I was saving up for a computer, and without asking me, he came to my house and told me that when I was free to visit him, since he had a computer that he had just fixed that I could use. That afternoon, I remember the rain was coming down hard when I arrived at his house. Armin greeted me with a warm welcome, telling me about the weather and offering me a towel. He took me into his living room, where he had the computer ready. "I've optimized it to work perfectly. I know it's not much, but it will be useful, at least until you buy another one." "Oh, it really wasn't necessary. It looks pretty new. I'll give it back to you as soon as I can buy a new one." "Take your time. I really don't need it." "Thank you, Armin. Let me buy you a beer one of these days." "Of course. I haven't been out with a friend for a while. I'd love to." After checking the computer, Armin looked at me with a slightly different expression. "There's something else I wanted to show you. It's a bit special." At that point, I assumed he was going to show me a new computer or some work he was doing on another computer. Instead, he took me to a room in the back of his house where there was a computer set up to project a video on a large screen. "This video is something very personal to me." At first, the image was blurry, but then it focused on a disturbing scene. I saw Armin with another person, a man I didn't know who he was. I thought it was some kind of elaborate prank, or perhaps a very private video of Armin with another man. "Armin, what is this? Wait. Keep watching." Suddenly, the images began to change. This wasn't just a video of two men. Something else was going on. Armin was devouring the other person. The images were horrifying. Muse's victim was screaming in pain, but also in ecstasy. This person was smiling as he slowly died, and the person next to me was the one who was killing him. Do you know what the worst part was? That while I was watching the video, he looked at me with a calmness that puzzled me even more. "He's not a joke. This really happened." Terror began to invade my body as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. Why are you showing me this?" That was all I could say. I was stammering, struggling to keep my composure. I felt the desperate need to get out of there, but my legs were barely responding. They were shaking. I felt like I could fall to the ground at any moment. "Hey, don't be upset. Just listen to me for a moment." I didn't answer him, not because I wanted to listen to him, but because I was so terrified that I couldn't even get the words out of my mouth. "This is a beautiful thing, a definitive union between two people. Brandes and I share something unique, something beyond what most people can understand. I am not a monster. I just have a different need, a need that I've learned to accept and embrace. And you can have that bond with me too." "I don't want any bond. I think you've misunderstood." "No. You've misunderstood. Or rather, you still don't understand. This is the best thing that can happen to you, and I know you will appreciate it. I know you will love it." My mind was in a panic, and I headed for the front door. I had to get out of there as soon as possible. Armin wasn't stopping me. I had time to escape. When I tried to open the door, I realized something. "Why did you lock the door?" On the other side of the room, Armin was standing, looking at me with a huge but sweet smile. "You don't need to leave yet. I want you to understand. I want you to feel what I feel." Armin slowly approached me. His presence felt more and more oppressive. We were both about the same height, but at that moment, I felt like he was 6 feet taller than me. I felt tiny, pathetic and tiny. "It's normal to be afraid. Even he didn't tell me. Even the guy in the video was afraid when I devoured him. But he still enjoyed it. A lot. You and me. This is going to be even better. We're going to share something special. We're going to be together. Forever. You're going to be a part of me. Like a chimera. Made of desire." Desperate, I ran to a nearby window, grabbing a vase on the way, hoping to use it to defend myself. I tried to hit Armin, but he was much faster, and to make it worse, my body barely reacted. He dodged my blows with ease and kept walking towards me as if I were just a kid with a toy. With no other choice, I used the vase to break the glass behind me. That was my only salvation. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, and for the first time, I surprised Armin, who seemed to be only a little nervous. I went running to escape, but just as I was about to jump out of the window, Armin lunged at me, holding me tight. "You can't leave now. Can't you see? I told you my secret. I gave you a computer. Why are you so ungrateful?" From the ground, I punched him in the face, but it didn't knock him down. Instead, he seemed to like it. And in response to that pleasure, he sank his teeth into my face. The pain was excruciating. He bit off several chunks of my flesh as he held me down with his nails sunk into my arms. Blood ran down my face and arms. "Help! Please help! In a last act of desperation, I pulled out my keys and jammed them into his waist. Armin cried out in pain, loosening his grip just enough for me to break free. Wasting no time, I threw myself through the broken window, feeling the glass cut me even more. Despite the pain, I kept running, driven by pure survival instinct. A car stopped when it saw me, and the driver, horrified, took me to the hospital. Behind me, I could see Armin running with a sad face, as if he were a friend who had forgotten something at home. Honestly, I think he still thought he could convince me. When I alerted my family, they immediately called the police. But Armin Muse was no longer at home, and the police could find no trace of him. I survived, but my face was completely disfigured. Every time I look in the mirror, I remember everything that happened that day. Every time I see my ruined and disfigured face, I curse the day I met Armin. And I hate myself for having been so innocent as to go to a complete stranger's house just because I was his neighbor. Today, people look at me with pity and curiosity. I hear people telling me things like I'm very brave or pretending that my face is not ruined. Those and many other things destroy me. I didn't do anything to deserve this. But still, I live it. My life is ruined, and no matter what punishment Armin received when he was captured, mine is much worse. This story is based on the famous crime of Armin Muse. After chatting on the deep web, he met Bernard Jürgen Brandes at his home, whom he murdered and devoured in 2001. After several crimes and accusations of attempted murder, Armin was finally arrested in December 2002.
I'm pretty sure everyone on the internet has heard and used the popular website called Wikipedia. Known as the largest collection of knowledge ever to be accumulated collaboratively in one place, the website is often stated to be the largest and most read reference work in history. We've all used it for work, school, and even research purposes. As the number of visitors on the website grows each day, so does its popularity. However, what most users of Wikipedia don't know is that the website has a truly disturbing and dark side. While everyone knows about Wikipedia, few people know of the hidden wiki. Located on the dark web, this ghastly website is inaccessible to the average internet user, as to access it, one would need to use the Tor browser. Unlike the free encyclopedia that we all know, Wikipedia's dark brother contains content that'll make your stomach turn. The disturbing links on the website lead to contract killers, illegal chemicals, banned weapons, and uncensored content. Due to all this, my experience with the website is truly horrific, and the story you're about to hear will explain why. I can remember this time of school very well because it was a period we all called the dark web phase. I can't recall how it started, but every student in school was obsessed with the dark web. My classmates would dare each other to go on the dark web, and anyone who didn't do it would be mocked and called a coward. Every new day, a student would come to school with a disturbing story and pictures telling us the horrors they'd seen on the dark web. These stories ranged from watching people get murdered on the notorious Red Rooms to purchasing illegal content from the infamous Silk Road. Basically, everyone was doing it, and the ones who weren't were dared to do the same. It soon became like a sick rite of passage, as using the dark web was the cool thing to do, and it wasn't long before it was my turn. I can still recall the fear in my heart that very day, as I was dared by my friends to visit the dark web. Even in my late teenage years, I didn't do well with morbid and disturbing content, so I wasn't sure if I was going to go through with it. However, I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to face my friends. Looking back on it now, even if I was terrified, the peer pressure to do it was overwhelming. All my friends were dabbling in the dark web, and I told myself that there was no reason why I couldn't do the same. So that day, I gathered up the courage and I downloaded the anonymizing browser called Tor. For those who don't know the Onion routing browser, or Tor as everyone knows it, it is one of the few ways to access the dark web. Unlike the clear web, the dark web is a bit all over the place. It isn't uniform and it can be overwhelming. Google doesn't exist on the dark web, as it has its own bizarre search engines. There are a few popular ones called Not Evil and Torch, as these are what people use to get around the dark web, but using those search engines can be very tricky for new users, especially if you don't know what to search for. However, there was a particular website I had been told to visit by my friends, and this website was called the Hidden Wiki. It's a bit difficult to properly explain what the Hidden Wiki is, as it's not a traditional search engine. But to put it in layman's terms, it's essentially a collection of popular dark web links. Once I had reached the Hidden Wiki website, I was greeted with numerous websites that led to illegal weapons, hard drugs, and snuff content. There were a lot of links to choose from, as I saw most of the major dark web websites like the Cannibal Forum, where real-life cannibals discuss how it feels to eat human flesh and their fresh organs. I even saw a link to the Human Experiments page, a ghastly forum that is considered to be one of the most disturbing websites on the deep web. This was because the people behind the website carried out morbid experiments with living people. There are apparently experimental videos of these people injecting bleach into pregnant women, sterilizing unwilling participants, subjecting infants to radiation exposure, and many other horrifying things I can't bring myself to say. I continued scrolling on the Hidden Wiki website as I took it all in. And for some unknown reason, I was drawn to a particular link called Steak and Cheese. Often called Rotten.com, this website is known for having a large collection of gruesome, violent, and macabre videos. After I clicked on the link, I was taken to the Steak and Cheese homepage. The content I saw there is enough to make any man throw up everything he'd eaten that day. I'm still disgusted to relay the things I saw, as they were pretty much extreme snuff content. There were numerous videos of children being tortured in chains. Most of them weren't over the age of 8. Another video called The Divine Feast showed live cannibalism as it depicted a man eating butchered human parts. The more I looked through the website, the more horrified I got. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I came across a video called True Eaters. I saw the horrific frames of the people in the video as they happily ripped apart little animals like kittens and rats before shoving the animals' carcasses down their throats. I had only been on the website for a few minutes, but I already wanted to leave. I was getting second thoughts about the whole thing, and I didn't think I could see anymore. But before I could leave, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a link to a video called Miss Necrophilia. From what I could tell, Miss Necrophilia seemed to be a dancer. She had a lot of videos on her page where she would sing songs and dance with what seemed to be plastic mannequins. Looking back on it now, I don't know why I didn't just leave the website at that point. I had already seen more than enough disturbing content, but my curiosity got the better of me as I was drawn to Miss Necrophilia's video. It was the only normal video I had seen on the entire Steak and Cheese website, so I caved in and clicked on the video link to watch the full thing. At the start of the video, the woman who I assumed was Miss Necrophilia just stared into the camera. She had put a lot of black mascara above and below her eyes. I can still recall the look in her eyes as she kept staring into the camera. It's hard to put into words, but her eyes looked completely empty, and it seemed like she had no soul. The video then cut to her living room, where she had 4 mannequins that were propped up in chairs behind her. The living room had better lighting, so I was able to see better. But that's when I realized there was something odd about these mannequins. For starters, they looked a bit too lifelike for mannequins, as the hair on the mannequins that resembled a man in his 40s looked a bit too real. I also had similar thoughts for the other 3 mannequins. The first 2 were mannequins of 2 small children, a boy and a girl that looked like they were around the ages of 9 and 10. As Miss Necrophilia carried the mannequins around, I noticed the movements of their fingers, and it looked really off. And I had a gut feeling that was telling me this was wrong. Even with the bizarre way the first 3 mannequins looked, it was the last one that threw me off the most. This particular mannequin resembled a 10-month-old infant. But what bothered me about this one was the fact that it looked like a pale life-size doll. Miss Necrophilia then picked up the bigger male mannequin, and she began to dance with it while singing an oddly jolly tune. I couldn't tell what she was singing as the song was in another language, but as she danced around singing with her mannequin, it felt like there was something I wasn't seeing, and that's when it hit me. The horrific realization finally dawned on me when Miss Necrophilia brought the life-sized doll closer to the camera while dancing, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Thousands of maggots were all over the male mannequin she was dancing with, and that's when my brain finally put it together. They weren't mannequins or life-sized dolls. These were corpses. They were all stiff and embalmed in something, which is why I mistook them for mannequins at first. If she hadn't brought them closer to the camera, I would have never realized that they were starting to rot. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. My mind struggled to comprehend the gruesome atrocity that it had just seen, and I was frozen in shock. I tried to find an explanation as to why a woman would be dancing with rotting corpses in her own living room, but I couldn't. Things took an even more morbid turn when I noticed the picture in the background. It was a family picture that showed a pregnant Miss Necrophilia, her husband, and her 2 children, and they all had a striking resemblance to the corpses. My stomach couldn't take it anymore as I felt the bile in my stomach rush towards my throat. Even after throwing up my lunch, I still couldn't move as I was transfixed to the screen, and I couldn't move my hands to stop the video. Looking back on it now, I don't know how long I stayed transfixed to the screen. It could have been 15 minutes or more, but after some time, a dialogue box popped up on my screen, and it took me out of the horrific trance. The odd chat box came from an anonymous chat room on the dark web, and the message read, "You've been watching this video for a really long time, buddy. I'm guessing you enjoy Miss Necrophilia's content. I'm also a huge fan of hers. You know she takes requests, and I'm sure Allison will make the perfect candidate as the next dancing corpse. After all, she takes ballet classes." My heart dropped to my stomach once I saw the name Allison, and I let out a guttural scream. I told myself that it couldn't be, but I didn't believe in coincidences. Allison was the name of my 12-year-old little sister. I had no idea how the person on the other side of that message knew that. What disturbed me even more was the fact that she had ballet classes after school, and they were held every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I looked at the date again, and the 16th of April 2010 fell on a Friday. With adrenaline and fear rushing through my body, I got my phone and dialed the police. I was talking so fast that I was basically incoherent. Even after my call, the police thought it was a prank call, so I immediately called my mom and asked where my sister was. She told me school was over and she'd just dropped her off at ballet classes. I then urged her to call the ballet school and confirm Allison was still with them. But when she called, the school told her Allison was nowhere to be found. All the color drained from my face as I thought the worst. I tried to explain everything, but I couldn't find the words. I knew this wasn't something I could properly explain on the phone, so I rushed to my mom's office. It was pretty close to our home, so I was able to get there in less than 8 minutes. I arrived there panting and out of breath, and I took a few seconds to calm down before telling my mom everything. When I was done, my mom walked up to me and slapped me across the face. She'd never hit me before in my life, and I knew exactly why she did it. I had single-handedly put my little sister's life in danger, and it was all because of a stupid dare. I could see the tears and fear in her eyes as she dialed 911. When the line went through, she calmly told them everything that happened. We were then told to wait at least 24 to 48 hours before declaring her missing, but my mother pleaded with the officers to do something now as she felt time was of the essence. My mother's longtime friend, Officer Daniel Barnes, was a deputy on the force, and he was able to convince them to start a search. In an hour, officers littered the streets with pictures of my little sister in hand, asking if anyone had seen her. After I told the officers everything, I also joined in the search for my little sister, and with every passing hour, the beating of my heart grew faster. We searched for 13 hours straight as we covered the entire town, but we didn't find anything. My mother, who had completely broken down into tears, couldn't look me in the eyes. I didn't blame her as I was the only one to blame. As the tensions kept rising to greater heights, I started to think the worst as I pictured Allison brutally killed by psychopaths, and I wondered whether I would see her in Miss Necrophilia's next video. Both the officers and the rest of the search party were visibly tired now. They already started slowing down, and people wanted to go home and continue tomorrow. But right before the search was about to be stopped, we received word that she'd been lying on a bench at the edge of town. We drove as fast as we could till we reached the location, and my mother cried tears of joy as she held Allison in her arms. She was examined by the paramedics, and they said she'd been chloroformed, but she was fine. When she regained consciousness, we asked what happened, and she told us she was taken from her ballet class a few minutes after our mother had dropped her off. She said she couldn't remember much after he grabbed her as the world was fuzzy, but the one thing she didn't forget was the only thing he told her. When I asked what he said, my little sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "Tell Donatello I said hello." This entire ordeal put the whole town on red alert. Our family had to move in with my mom's sister as the authorities monitored our home to make sure it was safe. I was questioned again, and I told the officers everything. I also assured them that I used an anonymous browser, but they told me that didn't matter with the kind of people on the dark web, as accessing my IP address or my computer's webcam and history is easy with the pedigree of hackers that roam around the dark web. The detectives believed this was how they were able to get such privileged and personal information in a matter of seconds. The authorities made numerous attempts to track the unidentified man who had taken my sister, but just like everything else on the dark web, he was untraceable. And no matter how much they tried, it was like he had vanished into thin air. They also tried to locate Miss Necrophilia, but that proved impossible too, as her videos had been scrubbed off the Steak and Cheese website. As the investigation came to a close and I went back to school, I'd heard the entire dark web phase had died down as both teachers and the authorities were actively warning students against using or visiting the dark web. It took a while for our family to get over that incident. My mom said she had forgiven me, but I could never forgive myself for what I put my family through. So please, to all who are listening, take my story as a warning to stay far away from the dark web because, while it might seem fun to you at first, I know full well that a simple link from the dark web can scar you for life. The story you just heard was based on an anonymous report from the town of Franklin, Tennessee, to the FBD, Franklin Police Department, on the 16th of April, 2010. The FPD deputy at the time had received a frantic call from an unknown caller that afternoon and the caller was apparently screaming about how he'd seen a strange woman dancing with corpses on the dark web. The caller then told the deputy that he believed he and his family were going to be killed by the woman in the video because she wanted to dance with their corpses next. But before the deputy could have said or done anything, the line was cut. Numerous attempts were made to contact the panicked caller, but he never picked up his phone. The Franklin authorities then tried to trace the call, but that proved fruitless as it was hard to pinpoint the caller's exact location. With no way to track down the caller, the detectives tried to find the unidentified woman who was dancing with the corpses and uploading the videos on the dark web. While they were able to find records of dark web users who had witnessed and watched these morbid videos on the dark web, they weren't able to find the woman or the original videos as they had all been scrubbed. With absolutely no leads, the case was never officially opened or pursued. As the years passed by, the case went cold and it was eventually forgotten over time. But to this very day, no one knows what happened to the frantic caller or the bizarre woman the detectives named the Macabre Dancer, who's still out there somewhere filming herself dancing with corpses and uploading these disturbing videos onto the dark web.
As a doctor who graduated in the 1980s, I hardly ever came into contact with a computer. Although all the management staff in my private hospital uses computers to do crucial tasks, I never really went beyond the papers and the pen. My two kids, Laya 12 years and Sam 14 years, are pretty good at using the computer and the internet. Even my wife manages to pay all the bills online. But despite being a surgeon, I'm not so good at using the computer or the laptop. So, to put an end to this issue, I asked my son to teach me the basics of the computer. I must say, taking computer lessons from my son was pretty fun. In the first few sessions, I became a pro at using all the basic features of the computer. However, we haven't yet started using the internet. You may have guessed it by now, but I didn't have an account on any social media platforms, so my son was going to help me set them up. He also told me that having social media accounts would make me more popular and get me more patients. And I would do anything to get more patients. So, as the days passed, I had an Instagram account, a Google account, a Facebook account, and a LinkedIn account. Although it was fun at first to find relatives and friends on these social media sites, I quickly grew bored of them and used them only for work and promotions at my hospital. Day by day, I was getting more and more familiar with these apps. One day, I was using my son's laptop while he was at school. A notification popped up in my browser. It said, "Do you want to get more patients, Dr. Phillip?" Back then, I wasn't much aware of the negative aspects of the internet or how people are tricked into doing bad things. So, you could guess how ecstatic I was when I saw that personalized notification. I clicked on the link below the notification, and when I did that, I got a warning from the browser that this wasn't a safe site, and that if I clicked on that link, I would be exploring the dark web. I had no clue what the dark web was, and honestly, the opportunity of having more patients and more publicity had blinded me for the moment. I clicked on the link, and a sophisticated-looking web page popped up. It asked me to fill out a form which would have all of my details, and soon I got an email. It was an invitation to a party that would help me to network. But there was a catch. I was not allowed to bring a +1. Meaning, I would not be able to take my wife with me. But Jeanette gets bored in my doctor's conferences anyway, so this was a boon in disguise. The party, or should I say so-called networking conference, was going to be a week later. I had my best suit out and a bunch of my business cards in my pocket. I was glad that I started the social media accounts and learning the computer. Otherwise, I would not have gotten this opportunity. I reached the party and it was nothing special, just a high-end party with lots of food and booze. For a moment, I thought this was some prank and someone had taken advantage of my lack of digital education. But soon, some of the famous people in our city showed up at the party and I saw my chance to network. I was having a good time, eating delicious food and having a drink every once in a while. That's when suddenly the music came to a halt and all the people cleared the dance floor. There was an eerie silence, one that you only encounter at funerals. There may have been 10 to 15 people wearing black robes with conical tall black hats walking out in a line. They surrounded the dance floor. I found this part of the party quite strange as none of them were showing their faces. Every single one of them had a devilish mask on their face, and each mask was scarier than the other. For a moment, I thought about my teenage daughter, who would have been terrified by this scene, and especially all the horrid-looking masks. But my attention was transfixed on the dance floor, in the center of which a small baby lay down. From my experience, I could say that the kid was a few months short of being a year old. The spotlights on the dance floor were focused on the baby, and so much brightness must have made the child cry. I could not spot the baby's parents anywhere in the audience, as no sane parent would expose a young kid to such a harsh light. Nevertheless, no one stepped forward to rescue the kid. Instead, one of the masked figures stood beside the kid. He said something in Latin, I guess, and then the rest of the masked men started drawing symbols around the baby with colored powders. The kid's cries were the only thing anyone could hear besides the chanting of some sort of Latin spell by the masked men. Soon, the leader of these men drew a knife and sliced the forehead and arm of the kid. I could tell from my seat that it wasn't a deep cut, but it still drew blood enough to make the kid shriek in pain. As a doctor, my first instinct was to go help the kid, but I somehow felt compelled to sit and watch like the rest of the people there. Then, the so-called ritual ended, and the masked men approached the spectators. One of them stood in front of me and introduced himself as Jordan. Then he proceeded and told me everything about myself. It felt as if he had done my background check before our meeting. "You came to this party to network, am I right, Dr. Phillip? Well, here's the deal. We could guarantee that your hospital will get more patients than ever, but in exchange, you will need to give us one of your children." The shock on my face must have spoken for itself, but Jordan immediately continued. No, doctor, not in the physical sense. We will not take away your child from you. We just need you to promise your kid's soul to us. Although now that I think about it, I understand how ridiculous it was of me to even consider such an offer. But at that moment, I kid you not, all I could see was how well my hospital would do if I made this deal. More patients meant more money, which indirectly meant better vacations for my family. Sure, Jordan. You can have my daughter, Laya. All right, Dr. Phillip. Consider the job done. And Jordan left as fast as he had come. And after a few minutes, all the masked men had gone and the party continued as usual. That night when I came home, my wife was in my daughter's room nursing her. Apparently, Laya had woken up, screaming and burning up. She had a temperature, and my wife was waiting for me to return. I quickly medicated her, and soon she was okay. Or so we thought. The night terrors continue to this day, and they're getting worse. Laya's health was deteriorating. She wasn't doing good in school or personally. She said that there were monsters in her dreams that wouldn't let her sleep, and would just torment her during the day, too. I was losing my kid before my own eyes. Deep down, I knew the reason. I just refused to admit it. I was trying to rationalize her behavior by taking her to psychiatrists, but nothing seemed to work. And one night, everything crossed its limit when Laya woke up screaming as usual. But this time, she had claw marks on her back which were so deep that I could see her raw flesh exposed. That's when I confided in my wife and told her why this was happening and all that happened at the party. She's a religious woman and contacted the church the next day. A priest named Father Ivan came to meet Laya, and he soon confirmed my suspicion that someone had done some kind of black magic on my daughter. I ended up telling him about the party too. He blessed Laya, which made her feel better for a few days, but not for long. Finally, Father Ivan performed a cleansing ceremony on my daughter, which was as good as baptizing her once again, introducing her to the faith again. This seemed to free Laya from the clutch of whatever evil had taken control of her. However, Father Ivan suggested we leave the country for good, as he suspected that whoever had done this to my daughter would return to collect his payment. I sold my hospital and our house, and we moved to Spain. In the end, I had to abandon the hospital I did all this for in order to save my family. Now we live in a Spanish village where I work as a healer. We are away from all the money and the prosperity of the city, and especially away from the internet and the dark web.